If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, aging. For decades, we've been told to eat less fat, particularly less whole fat dairy. However, in a recent paper titled Diet, Cardiovascular Disease, and Mortalities in 80 Countries, published in the European Heart Journal, Andrew Mente and others concluded that a diet comprised of whole fat dairy, as well as fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, and fish, may be protective against cardiovascular disease. In this episode, we discuss dairy foods and the challenges seniors may face that can make it difficult for them to maintain a healthy diet for aging well.
Dr. Armstrong, we've talked a lot in several episodes about nutrition for aging well.
We have. We talked about egg in episode 53 and the Mediterranean diet in episode 34.
We also talked about the impact of foods in episode 20, alcohol in episode 16 and 68, and intermittent fasting in episodes 35 and 88.
We also talked about seniors eating junkier diets.
Episode 23?
That was the one. I'm sure we have nutrition for healthy aging sprinkled throughout many of the episodes of the Aging Well podcast as well.
But have we talked about milk?
I don't believe we have.
Oh, perhaps we can milk it today.
Okay. It's not that funny there.
It's pretty funny. All right. So I came across an article in MedPage today referring to a study that suggests we might want to rethink the topic of whole milk. It refers to a study in the European Heart Journal by Andrew Mente and others titled Diet, Cardiovascular Disease and Mortalities in 80 Countries. The study concluded that a diet comprised of higher amounts of fruit, vegetables, nuts, legumes, fish, and whole fat dairy is associated with lower cardiovascular disease and mortality in all world regions, especially in countries with lower income where consumption of these foods is low.
The suggestion to increase consumption of fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, and fish is no real surprise. We've discussed this before. Whole milk? That's a bit surprising.
It was surprising to me.
The study aimed to, one, develop a healthy diet score from the large prospective urban rural epidemiology or PURE cohort study involving 147,642 people from 21 countries in 5 continents. 2, examine the consistency of the associations of the PURE healthy diet score with events in 3 independent prospective studies, having an N of 43,834 in 50 countries, and 2 case control studies of myocardial infarction with an N of 26,191 in 52 countries, or stroke, N equal 26,930 in 33 countries. 3, assess whether the PURE healthy diet score is applicable to people from high, middle, and low income countries from various regions of the world, and to those with and without prior cardiovascular disease. And 4, compare the performance of the PURE healthy diet score with that of other commonly used diet scores, Mediterranean diet, HE1 2010 and 2015, DASH, and planetary diet scores.
MedPage today adds that unlike previous diet scores, the PURE healthy diet score does not penalize eating red meats with a maximum score of 6. The PURE score simply awards 1 point each for above median consumption of fruit, vegetables, nuts, legumes, fish, and whole fat dairy.
So it appears that Pure was found to be slightly more predictive of composite events than the Mediterranean, 2010 and 2015 healthy eating indexes, and DASH diet scores, and substantially more predictive than the Lancet Planetary Diet Score.
The research concluded that the findings suggest that the inadequate levels of consumption of key healthy foods is a larger problem than overconsumption of some nutrients or foods, such as saturated fat or whole fat dairy and meat, all of which are consumed in lower amounts with a lower diet score for mortality and CVD risk around the world. So, what are the implications for aging well?
That's a good question. The study, which excuse us for the boring data and all those things, but those who are interested, we will link the study and the MedPage Today article in the description notes. But the study is focused on studies where underconsumption is a problem. In the U.S., where obesity is rapidly rising, the problem is often to be considered one of overconsumption.
For Americans, though, is it a question of consumption of food recommendation, fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, fish, and whole fat dairy?
I would say so.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me back when I was an activities director at an assisted living, and I kind of got to see firsthand a lot of the improper diets that a lot of the individuals were given, because a lot of people, they're placing their loved ones or relatives into an assisted living, an independent living, something where it's like, hey, I'm giving you my loved one and I would like you to be taking care of them. And a bunch of the main things that people are looking for is, are they going to have a good time with their activities department? Are they going to go out on these outings? Are they going to get their exercise? And the second thing is, are they going to have their nutritional needs met? What's the food situation going to look like? Some of those individuals in particular have a really, really specific food diet, such as, they can't have a lot of sodium in their diet. And it's really interesting because in those assisted livings or independent livings or, adult foster homes, it's kind of the luck of the draw, in my opinion. There are certain scenarios where, yes, the cooking staff will do their absolute best to help accommodate, but in reality, it kind of depends on the budget. It's just kind of filled with sodium and a bunch of other preservatives. You would literally just see the cooking crew just kind of add that as seasoning to it. And in a lot of those individuals that needed to have that low sodium diet, they ended up swelling up, or they ended up just gaining an unsubstantial amount of weight that was in an unhealthy way. So it would seem that aging Americans, particularly those approaching the fourth age, often have poor diets.
Indeed, and the listener might recall in episode 23, we shared how seniors are eating junkier diets.
But why is this?
Well, you talked about senior centers and the economics behind why they might not be feeding the most healthy of diets, but also even the seniors that are living independently are facing a lot of challenges. It can make it difficult for them to maintain a healthy diet. And there's a lot of different reasons why seniors might not eat sufficiently healthy diets. And one is physical limitations. As we age unsuccessfully, we often have decreased mobility or physical disabilities that can make it challenging to shop for groceries, prepare meals, or even eat independently. Think of having to open a can of tuna or something like that to get some protein. It becomes much more difficult. I have difficulty opening some of the packaging that foods come in now. So I can imagine an older adult who is more limited not being able to open it all. So if they can't open it, they're not going to eat it. And if they can't transport it from the grocery store to their home, or they can't reach top shelves or whatever it might be, that's going to have an impact on how much they eat and what kind of foods they eat.
That's true. My grandma, as she was getting to the end of her life, she would just kind of either not eat just because it became or she would just forget to eat and Yeah, it's a really sad concept. You know what I mean? You don't even think about that. You kind of take that for granted at this age where you're like, oh, I can open anything. But you're right. At some point, even packaging becomes kind of a hassle. That's kind of a sad concept.
Yeah, and you also have financial constraints. Most people, even in third age, as we enter into retirement, if we are not financially well prepared for third age, we're living on fixed incomes. Even if you are pretty well to do, you still, your income is fixed, no matter how big or small it is. So we're on fixed incomes. Healthcare expenses can lead to budget constraints. And it can make it really difficult to afford nutritious food. I hear a lot of people in first and second age complaining about how expensive healthy foods are. Now, I don't totally agree with that. I think there are very economical choices that we can make to eat healthy, but it does become an issue with, okay, we can buy some of these foods, but if it involves a lot of preparation, that becomes a challenge for aging adults.
Yeah, I remember it being a struggle when I was in college. All right, so what about loss of appetite?
Yeah, aging can also lead to a reduced sense of taste and smell. So this is one of the reasons why a lot of older individuals really gravitate towards sweets, because that's something they can taste a little bit more effectively than other foods. And so appetite can be significantly suppressed when they can't really taste the foods or they don't have the appetite for it. And if you don't have the appetite for food, then you're less likely to be consuming more nutritious foods. And, so there's that desire for more flavorful foods. And so we eat things that tend to be junkier and less healthy.
Mm. So there's also dental problems, right? We got to consider that. There's individuals out there that either they didn't take care of their teeth, and so there's a lot of the cavities, and maybe they can't afford to go see a dentist to fix it. There's probably ill-fitting dentures out there, which also has an impact on chewing food in order to consume it. And this can be even painful for an individuals when they're chewing foods such as fruits, vegetables, and even lean protein. And we know the importance of taking that in.
Yeah, the healthiest foods that we should be eating are sometimes a little bit hardest to chew. And so they're going to gravitate to things that are going to be much more softer. Of course, there's ways around that. And anybody that's in that situation, we'll talk a little bit more as we get toward the end of today's episode, but we'll talk a little bit about how we can take food and make it more palatable but also more consumable. Smoothies, you blend all that stuff together, it's a lot easier to consume. I know this isn't necessarily a dental issue, but in my mom's final years, she was having difficulty, and we were never aware of it. She never really told us that she was having difficulty we knew she had difficulty keeping certain foods down, but we thought it was just more of a palatability piece of it. And what the problem was that her esophagus had become constricted. And so she wasn't able to pass a lot of food down into the stomach. And so she was throwing up a lot of food, and only the foods that can pass through would get by. And one thing that, I was doing was sending her a lot of like the Ensures and those high protein source kind of liquid meals for her to consume. And that was getting some nutrients into her, but she wasn't getting food in. And so you could have dental issues, or there may be other medical issues that are going to limit the capacity to get some of those healthier foods in. And a lot of times a more liquid, flavorful diet might be the alternative to make sure that the seniors are getting a significant amount of good, healthy food in their diet.
Yeah. And then going back to my experience in the assisted living, another thing that really affected the appetite was actually their medication that they were on. Some medications does affect appetite, and I'm assuming it would also affect the taste as well, because I remember a lot of them, they would go to eat something on certain days where they were given that medication and they couldn't taste anything. And the days where they didn't have that particular medication, everything was overwhelmingly flavorful for them. So I know out there that medication can affect the perception of taste. I'm assuming that medication will also affect the nutrition absorption and potentially leading to a lot of other dietary challenges.
Yeah, I mean, you just look at some of the long lists of side effects of a lot of these medications, and then you have the combined effects. It can really mess with their both the appetite as well as the nutrient absorption. Kind of brings me to kind of the thought of, we here in Oregon have legal marijuana consumption, and we know that marijuana and, one of the side effects is increased appetite. And so there may be some benefit in the older population, not necessarily, token on a joint, but, taking like CBD gummies or, some of the more specific kind of hemp-based products that can, and there's apparently numerous different benefits of some of the different chemicals that are available that, some of it's blocked by pharmaceutical companies and whatnot, but, it may be that consuming the appropriate sources of kind of CBDs is going to give them an appetite that might actually allow them to eat more. Give the old people the munchies. And, maybe, whatever we can do rather than like consuming a lot of other medications and things, like take one drug to offset the effects of another drug, look at some more healthier solutions for people to be able to increase their appetite so that they can maintain the healthy diet. A lot of seniors have digestive issues, which, not only are they not getting into the system, but also it's not able to be absorbed from the system. I think you might have mentioned a little bit about the brain capacity, thinking or, desire for food, but, conditions like dementia, Alzheimer's disease, they can all lead to forgetfulness. I mean, we tend to, many of us in our younger years are like, oh, I wish I could forget to eat, right? But for the older, fourth age adult that's in poor health and struggling from cognitive decline, that forgetfulness, that confusion, that could lead to them forgetting to eat, forgetting how to cook, forgetting that they've eaten or not eaten. And so that can have some significant effects on their nutritional intake.
Another thing that a lot of people don't consider is when a loved one gets placed into that that senior living home, that there's an entire psychological aspect of it that leads an individual into feeling loneliness or depression. And what they do is they socially isolate themselves. And with social isolation and feeling of loneliness or depression, that can definitely impact not just a senior, but anyone's motivation to eat and live a healthy lifestyle.
And that doesn't have to be in a senior living community. I mean, you have a lot of seniors who are aging in place and, families not visiting them. We live in communities now that are just not as good about interacting. We used to have the front porch, and I remember growing up, you see a lot of the older neighbors would be kind of sitting on their porch and you walk by and you're saying hi to them and there's a little bit more interaction. We don't see that as much anymore. And that could also lead to a bit more of those feelings of isolation and depression that would decrease their motivation to get and eat healthy meals. I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging.
Another thing, and I know we've talked about this in previous podcasts, but limited access to healthy food. I know that living in areas that with limited access to fresh, affordable nutrients, or that can also hinder one to make those healthy choices.
Yeah, we have, even in first, second, and third age, there are a lot of communities out there that are living in food deserts where there's just not simply access to good, healthy food. So that becomes even more limited as we age. You get to the point where they take away your driving privileges, take away, your ability to kind of get to those stores. I mean, again, the community I grew up in, I remember only the older neighbors that were able to walk to the grocery store because we had grocery stores within walking distance, and they had their little carts. I remember those little box-like carts that you could wheel down to the grocery store, and they'd wheel those back. So they were able to get their groceries and transport them. But now when we have these mega grocery stores that you have to drive to, and if you can't drive to them, don't have anybody to drive you there, that's going to limit your access to that food. Now, fortunately, a lot of stores now have shifted, especially with COVID. There's been even more opportunities with it where you can order your groceries online. You can actually have stuff delivered, but that adds to the cost of the foods. It makes the selection a little bit more difficult because now they have to manage on their computers to how to figure out how to get to the food. There are solutions, I think, in our communities that we can make to get better access to not only aging adults, but to all individuals, and no matter what your socioeconomic status, to be able to have better access to healthy foods. That's a huge problem, I think, in this country. There's also the knowledge piece as well. I mean, many seniors may not have access to the information of what is proper nutrition. And these nutritional guidelines have gone back and forth so much. It has to be confusing to somebody who's not really kind of in that area of, academic study and so on. And so, here we are, we're talking about the need for more whole dairy in the diet for the seniors. Many of these people have heard for years, well, high fat's bad for me, and I shouldn't be consuming that. And now that information has to get to them. And that's one of the reasons I think we're talking about this today and why we do this podcast, to try and get that information to people so that they can make better decisions about what their nutritional needs are as they are aging and attempting to age well.
Yeah, I just lack of knowledge. I don't think it's just limited to just the fourth agers. And sometimes it's not even a lack of knowledge. It's just an overstimulation of knowledge. Like there's so much information that's out there, and a lot of it conflicts itself.
Well, I think now we're being over inundated with misinformation about nutrition and supplementation and all the other bullshit that's out there from some of these, so-called influencers and all that other kind of stuff. It's really confusing. Anybody even has access to that information. And of course, as seniors age too, their taste preferences will change as we age. I mean, I'm less and less really wanting to eat the hot, spicy foods that just even a few years ago I really, really wanted to eat. My preferences have changed a little bit, and I'm sure they'll continue to change as I continue to age well.
I like that. And what about dietary restrictions? A lot of seniors with specific medical conditions such as diabetes or heart disease, they may have dietary restrictions that can be challenging to follow without that proper guidance.
And that's confusing to me when we talk about how because seniors have medical conditions, they may have dietary restrictions that make, getting in some of these nutrients difficult. That's the responsibility of the medical community to educate them in how to get the best diet given their medical conditions. And physicians, I think they might take maybe one nutrition class throughout med school. So physicians are not the best sources of information when it comes to nutrition. Again, most of them are going to be take a pill and go on. And so how do we get that information to them when they have medical conditions? There has to be a better system in terms of educating them, giving them proper guidance. And we know, and we talked about this when you took exercise motivation and adherence, we talked about how for seniors, they are more likely to take the advice of their physician. And so if the physician is not giving them the proper nutritional guidance, they're just saying, this is the condition you have, don't do this, but they don't tell them, do this, it's not going to help them. And so we got to get better about that.
It's a weird concept, isn't it? Like, I think we had that same conversation with David Crafts with the super aging.
Oh, yeah.
And they talked about that, how that demographic of clientele, everything that their doctor says, that was it. That was the word. Yep, I'm going to follow that. And now we've kind of transitioned to where it's like, well, I don't know if I'm going to necessarily trust this doctor who went through years of medical school. It could be something different. I'm going to dive in and do my own research. It's like, that's very interesting to me how times have changed.
Well, hopefully they have. I worry that this upcoming generation is, they're going to question things, but they're going to the wrong sources for information, and they're so easily misled by information that comes from sources that they perceive as reputable because they're celebrities, rather than, sources of information that come from people who are reputable because they are of greater expertise in those particular areas.
So what can people do to eat better to age well?
Well, I think, as we've started to allude to, we got to address these challenges. It's important for seniors to seek support and assistance when needed. And again, that's a very challenging thing for any of us to do at any age, is to ask for help. And so have to be willing to make those decisions to help where they're able to. It's going to involve working with healthcare professionals, family members, or caregivers to develop meal plans that will meet those nutritional needs and accommodate for their special or specific circumstances. But also community resources. We need, better meal delivery services. I mean, there are things like Meals on Wheels, but I believe only serves like one meal per day, which is better than nothing. Senior centers need to be a bit more conscientious about serving nutritious foods, providing a little bit better social interaction. Those communities where they have dining halls and everybody can gather, like that's the kind of community my mother-in-law lives in. And that's a big piece of the social interaction, is everybody gathering for dinner. And when you have that, they're going to be a little bit more likely to gather and eat a healthy meal. But it's got to be, foods that are going to contribute to those better dietary needs. And so, one of the things that we're talking about today, or kind of the main topic today, is getting more dairy. We've touched on over previous episodes talking about legumes and fresh fruits and vegetables. And most people, I think, know that they need those. And, that's always been the case. Always get more vegetables, always get more fruit. When it comes to fruit, though, there could be some challenges, because some of the better fruits that you can be eating could be very difficult for older adults to eat. I mean, apples, for example, relatively cheap, nutritious source of nutrition, but you got dentures, you got bad teeth, it's hard to bite into an apple. So maybe in that case, it's pureeing some of those fruits and vegetables into smoothies or whatever it might be. But we can work toward getting more whole fat dairy in a senior's diet by just simply changing, some of the ways that they consume food. And one benefit of the whole fat dairy, other than, the benefits to the nervous system, which we're realizing what a huge mistake we've made over the last probably 40 years, saying, oh no, cut the whole fat out of your diet. You want to go to non-fat products, you want skim milk and all those types of things. We start losing the fats that our body needs to be able to adequately maintain normal nervous system function.
It's not just normal system, it's not just nervous system. It's also your endocrine system as well.
There are strategies that we can use to increase the senior's consumption of whole fat dairy products. The obvious one is choose whole milk. Opt for whole milk instead of skim or some of the other low fat varieties. There's been a lot of push for almond, soy, oat milk, and all these other alternative quote unquote milk products. And they have their benefits. I mean, I do tend to gravitate toward almond milk for a lot of my blended shakes and things like that, because the carbohydrate content is a bit lower, and that affords me to be able to use other like fruits and vegetables and things like that to get my nutritious carbohydrates as opposed to just sugary carbohydrates if I need to kind of keep my calories down a bit. But I'll often just put in heavy cream in order to compensate for that and to get a little bit more fat into the shake or the diet.
I would also add in, just because we're talking about healthier choices, would you also suggest non-pasteurized milk if given the opportunity, since it's not heated up to that degree, changing the protein intake?
Yeah, if you can get it, but who has access? I mean, we're talking about a senior community that doesn't have access to nutrition food. And now you're saying, oh, okay, here's something that's going to be even harder to get. Well, so I wouldn't even worry about that. Okay. Again, we can tend to muddy the waters a little bit by worrying about some of the minor deficiencies in the foods that we have access to and kind of miss the big picture. And yeah, I think if you could get non-pasteurized milk, that's going to be much more beneficial to you. And, many of our senior Americans living in farming communities, it's a lot easier to do that. And they've grown up on that. And chances are those people who are consuming pasteurized milk are not the people we're talking to that need to increase their milk fat in their diet. They're probably already getting a good, healthy source of that. So how else can we get a little bit more whole fat dairy into our diet?
Full fat yogurt. Full fat yogurt selects full fat yogurt increase instead of low fat or fat-free options. Greek yogurt is also an excellent choice. It's one of my favorites as it's typically higher in fat and in protein. And overall, I just like the flavor. I just think it's significantly better.
Yeah, I'm not a huge yogurt eater, but my wife, my son both consume a good amount of Greek yogurt. My daughter will occasionally eat it, although she's a little bit more lactose intolerant, or at least she thinks she is. But yeah, that's a great source. And it's palatable for older adults. If you're losing some of that taste, you get a lot of those flavored Greek yogurts that are sweet, kind of almost dessert-like kind of meal, but you're getting that healthy fat and some protein into that's going to be helpful for them. Full fat cheese. And we've been fed over the years this notion that you got to go low fat, non-fat. And so we've shifted away from some of the more fuller fat varieties, but we can add cheese to the meal to, again, make it more palatable. It's going to cause people to eat a little bit more. Now, when fat is, body fat is an issue, we got to look at total calories. But there's a benefit of adding this fat into the diet because it can actually cause us to eat less calories because we're going to consume less of the poor nutritious carbohydrates because we're going to feel fuller. And so full fat cheese, using that as a topping, mixing in food, is going to add flavor and a little bit more creaminess to the food dishes that'll make it more appetizing to people.
I just heard everyone pull out their charcuterie boards.
Yeah, there you go.
To get that cheese ready. So actually, I've talked in the past about senior living and how they would cook a lot of the food with butter. And now that I think about it, I don't think it was actually butter. I think it was margarine, which has a lot of that preservative. Butter is something we should be promoting, especially after reading this article. Butter or ghee. Incorporate small amount of butter or ghee, which is clarified butter, into cooking or as a spread on whole grain bread and vegetables.
Yeah, and I don't think that it's always a big problem for a lot of American seniors. I think where it's become a problem is, like you said, it has become margarine. We got pushed into margarine. I think actually part of that was kind of in the World War II, post-World War II era, where some of these dairy fats there was a shortage of dairy fats. Margarine became another alternative to providing like a butter-like source. And then they, of course, have to add coloring to it so that it looks like butter. And it's just not a healthy option. It's not the same kind of fats. It's basically hydrogenated fats as opposed to natural saturated fats. A lot of people probably in America are already consuming enough butter-like substances. But now we have to kind of encourage people to kind of shift back to, gee, I can't believe it's not butter, to, gee, it is butter, right?
Right.
And, avoiding margarine, not using excessive amounts of butter, but using a little bit more of it to get some of that fat into the diet.
Anyways, another thing that people can use to get that high fat dairy consumption is cottage cheese. Because as we all know, cottage cheese is a good source of protein and can be enjoyed as a snack or added to salad or recipes. I personally like to add a little fruit into my cottage cheese, and I think it just brings out an amazing flavor.
I'm not a cottage cheese eater.
Oh, I am. It's so good.
I need to add too much other stuff to it to make it palatable. But, a lot of people do like cottage cheese. And again, if we can mix that with some of our healthier fruits, and I've never heard of having cottage cheese and vegetables, but, we can add it to recipes. There's ways that we can use it to add a little bit more fat into our diet. And of course, we come to smoothies. I mean, everybody likes smoothies. Smoothies are a great way to just get more nutrients into our diet. Just particularly in the aging population where maybe chewing, swallowing, ingesting food is going to be a little bit more difficult. We can blend those fruits, vegetables, put a little bit of flavoring in there, get some, added protein, maybe some whey protein, adding yogurt, and through that get a better concentration of nutrients into our food in something that's a relatively tasty beverage. A couple smoothies a day might not be a bad idea for the particularly fourth age individuals, but other individuals that aren't simply getting enough nutrients.
Now, that's primarily individuals that are having a hard time chewing, right? Not those with a medical condition such as diabetes, because can't a smoothie affect their blood glucose level differently?
Depends how you make the smoothie,
okay.
Right? Because remember, too, with the whole fat, you're also slowing the digestion and absorption of those carbohydrates. So having more fat into something that has a little bit higher carbohydrate concentration is going to slow that insulin spike a little bit more. So it may actually help to benefit their insulin levels and help control their diabetes a little bit more effectively. But of course, this is where good conversation with a nutritionist that understands your medical conditions is going to help you to develop kind of a recipe for your smoothie that's going to be most nutritious for you. And then also kind of timing those. A lot of our fourth age seniors are so used to on the clock taking their medications. Why not getting them kind of into a prescription where, every 4 hours you need to, at breakfast you eat this, mid breakfast to lunch, eat something else, So I always talk in my diet of first breakfast, second breakfast, first lunch, second lunch, first dinner, third dinner. So I eat 6 meals a day. We could do the same with the elderly to encourage them to get the intake of these specific nutrients at specific times throughout the day.
What about pudding?
Pudding is good. Everybody loves pudding. And, we can make homemade. I mean, that's a suggestion that some will make homemade pudding. And again, making homemade pudding can be a bit more difficult. A lot of seniors might gravitate more towards the, mixes of, like Jell-O pudding and things like that. But if you're making even those mixed puddings with whole milk, you're getting that extra milk fat in there. Mm. And so the key is to try and get ones that are going to be sweetened with more natural sweeteners as opposed to, pure sugar, maybe a little bit of fruit in it. Mix it up in a way that it's going to make it more nutritious. How else can we get some more milk fat into our diets?
I would say creamy soups such as like chowder.
I love chowders.
Yeah, man, clam chowder.
And bisques.
So good. Yep.
I don't eat clam, so clam chowder is kind of
more like a lobster bisque guy?
No, I don't eat lobster. I don't eat shellfish because shellfish, eating the bottom feeders of the ocean are just not the healthiest choices. I mean, you're eating stuff that is present to clean up the environment. So they're going to have all kind of that crap and toxins in them. I'm just not in favor of, I eat a bit more of a Jewish diet when it comes to like shellfish, pork, and those types of things. And so I stay away from the clam, the lobster, crab, all that kind of stuff. I know they can taste very good, and if you eat it, that's fine. It's your choice. But if I was going to eat it, the only way I would eat lobster would be as a lobster bisque, as a soup. Same with clams or any of that. But potato soups, creamy tomato soup, I think is so much better than the just liquid tomato soup. So adding some whole milk or cream into your soups can be a good option. Oatmeal is a really good carbohydrate source that is very palatable, easy to ingest. There's not a lot of chewing involved with it, but it's got a good amount of fiber, good healthy fiber. Put a little whole milk in that or some cream, mix some yogurt in, maybe some nuts. All that can help to increase some of that fat content. And who doesn't like desserts? And I think, unfortunately, this is probably the more likely area in which American seniors are going to get more of their dairy fat is going to be in the sweets. And we want to be careful how we're consuming those treats. We want ice cream or custard that's made with whole milk and real ingredients, not a lot of sugar, but it is a good source of getting some of that whole dairy in there.
No cheesecake? That should be...
Cheesecake would fall under that dairy type dessert.
Yeah.
But it's probably not the best source for your dairy, although there are some good recipes out there. We've had Sandy Griffin on a few times. I mentioned that she's quite a bit of a foodie. And if you go to her website, she has a lot of really good recipes. She has a really good high protein cheesecake. And I love cheesecake. That's probably one of my go-to desserts, but it's got to be a good one. So she's got some recipes for something like that. So again, just when we look at dessert, we want to make that dessert something that's going to be enjoyable and healthy and worth kind of the sin that might be involved with that dietary food. Like when I eat ice cream, I'm not going to eat cheap, crappy ice cream. It comes in the square box containers. I want to go to something like, people around Portland here would know Salt and Straw, where you have really good whole dairy, flavorful ice cream, and it's going to make it much more worth my while to consume those extra calories than to just have something that's a lot of sugar and not really good whole dairy. Are you an ice cream person?
I am an ice cream person. That's like one of my weaknesses. And when I get a craving for ice cream, it's a craving. Like it is a beast that needs to be fed right then and there. And man,
when we get those dessert cravings, though, we have to answer them wisely.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times if we have junk available and we get that craving, we're going to go to the junk. But if we have to kind of go out of our way, go out for ice cream. I even like soft serve ice cream is not maybe the healthiest, but I'll treat myself to that once in a while because it's good. It's just one of those summer treats. I remember, growing up that, the Dairy Queens weren't open year round. They were only open, as soon as summer started. And that was like, was it the Robin or the Dairy Queen that was the first sign of spring? It's like you got to do it in a way that it is going to be pleasant and enjoyable, and you're not going to feel this level of guilt after doing it, or you're not going to be like, you take a lick of it and it's like, oh man, this is so bad, and why am I doing this? But you just keep doing it, So if you're going to treat yourself to ice cream, do it right.
It's crazy. I only get cravings of ice cream during winter time.
When you're pregnant?
Yeah. It's weird because a lot of people are like, I want something really cold during summertime. But when it gets really, really cold and it's wintertime, that's when I crave ice cream. I don't know why that is. It's the weirdest.
Generally never crave ice cream.
I'm saying it's random when I get a craving for ice cream, but it's pretty bad.
I think keeping cheese around is another good source for getting some dairy in there, to have cheese as a snack. Again, we got to clarify here too that we're not asking people who are already consuming significant amounts of whole dairy fat to add to their dairy fat consumption. But if you're not getting dairy fat, if you've been one who has shifted away from fat foods to non-fat, low fat, you can add it back into your diet and know that it's going to be a bit more protective of cardiovascular disease, not as detrimental to your health as we've been led to believe in the past. And then as well, we want to look at getting diets fortified a little bit more for seniors. So if they have difficulty meeting their nutritional needs through whole foods, want to look at fortified dairy alternatives, particularly things that have high levels of vitamin D can be good. There are other nutrients. I mentioned almond and soy milk. I'm not a big fan of soy milk for so many reasons that soy I don't think is the best option for individuals, but those alternatives also have nutrients in them that we can get some of the dairy benefits without too much added fat. And we also want to consider, as a listener is hearing what we're saying, take the advice from the perspective of their own preferences. What do you prefer in your diet? What are your dietary preferences? What are your restrictions? What underlying health conditions you have? That, when you're considering these recommendations, how does all that interact? And consult with a healthcare provider. Make your doctor make some good decisions or learn about nutrition a little bit more. If the doctor doesn't know, which likely doesn't, consulting a registered dietitian is a good option, or a nutritionist, to make sure that your dietary choices are going to align with your specific needs.
Hey, you mentioned the Mediterranean diet. Speaking of that, and since we're on the subject of dairy, does it really matter if an individual is taking in cow dairy or if it's goat dairy?
I don't believe so. And again, I'm not a registered dietitian, so I might miss something in there, and I certainly can't give that advice. But I do know that goat milk is actually a little bit closer to like human breast milk in terms of the nutrition composition. And so it's my understanding that it actually is a little bit healthier for humans to consume than cow dairy. But I think, again, it's availability and accessibility to those products and cost and everything else, because goat milk can be a lot harder to get. It can be a lot more expensive. And so if we are already having difficulty getting access to good, healthy foods, saying that something is a little bit better and so you should go for it makes it less accessible. That makes sense. Yeah. So I would say, it is probably a bit better, but it's going to be more challenging to find it. So if you have access to it, great. I would strongly recommend that over cow's milk. And I have relatives that had a dairy in Pennsylvania, so I don't mean any offense to them. I have milk bottles on my living room mantle that come from the Moyer Dairy when I was growing up. But I think the difference really between cow's milk and goat's milk is almost negligible. You're going to consume what you have the better access to. Both of them are going to contain the similar kind of fats. And so one versus the other is going to be fine. If you're having goat's cheese, it's going to be maybe even tastier in some ways than, cheese that's made with cow's milk. So there are two options.
Okay. Thank you.
So I guess just to wrap this up, I think it's important for us to go back to this concept of what is the healthiest diet for the American population, but, really the global the aging population. And it would appear, we've talked a lot about the Mediterranean diet and diets that are going to be high in fruits, vegetables, particularly in nuts and legumes. And we talked about legumes being one of the really big nutritional items that should be included in more of our food. Getting more fish in the diet. Those, everybody I think is aware of. It's just getting access to those. But we can underscore now that the evidence is basically indicating that adequate whole fat dairy in the diet, so that it's not negatively impacting our caloric balance, so that we're not having excessive calories or excessive amount of fats. We want enough fat in the diet so that the body can function well. And that's actually going to lower our risk of cardiovascular disease and other mortalities. And so if we're eating a healthy, balanced diet and including some whole fat dairy in there, that's going to help us to
age well.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.